The cafeteria smelled like industrial coffee and reheated mashed potatoes. Ruth Calloway was wiping down the laminate counter with a bleach rag when the termination letter arrived. Not in a sealed envelope, not with the quiet, clinical dignity of a private meeting behind closed doors. It was slid across the wet countertop by a 28-year-old HR coordinator named Paige, who couldn't hold eye contact and kept chewing the end of her ballpoint pen. "Effective end of business today," Paige said, staring somewhere in the vicinity of Ruth's left shoulder. "The restructuring team has identified your position as redundant. We'll need your badge at the front desk before 5. Ruth picked up the single-page letter. She read it twice, slowly, the way she read everything. Her reading glasses were perched on the end of her nose, the cheap plastic frames held together on the left hinge by a tiny strip of medical tape she had applied herself 6 months ago and never gotten around to replacing. The letter was clean and corporate and completely devoid of any language that acknowledged the 11 years she had spent in this building. She set it back down on the wet counter. "All right," Ruth said. Paige blinked, visibly bracing herself for a scene that wasn't coming. "We can have security escort you to collect your—" "I know where my locker is," Ruth said, not unkindly. She folded the letter in thirds along its original creases, tucked it into the front pocket of her scrub top, and went back to wiping the counter. That was Ruth Calloway in her entirety. 61 years old, white-haired, heavy-framed, wearing scrubs 2 sizes too large, because she had stopped caring about the cut of her clothes sometime around the year she turned 50. She wore thick-soled orthopedic shoes that squeaked on linoleum and reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, and she moved through the corridors of Hargrove General Hospital in Chattanooga, Tennessee, with the unhurried, seismic patience of a woman who had already survived every category of catastrophe the world had to offer, and found the day-shift cafeteria largely unimpressive by comparison. To the administration, she was a line item. To the dietary supervisors, she was the reliable, slow, slightly odd older nurse they kept in the cafeteria because she never called in sick and because patients consistently refused to eat their meals unless Ruth was the one who brought them. To the bright young residents who came through on their lunch breaks, she was invisible, the way all older women in institutional settings become invisible, absorbed into the background hum of the place, like the flickering of the fluorescent lights above the steam trays. To absolutely nobody in that hospital was Ruth Calloway anything other than exactly what she appeared to be. That was, without question, exactly the way she preferred it. Hargrove General had been going through what the administration called a dynamic restructuring initiative for the better part of 3 months. In practical terms, this meant that a consulting firm out of Nashville had been brought in to identify inefficiencies, and the firm had identified the single most significant inefficiency as its older, higher-salaried support staff. The language in the internal memos was careful, legally vetted, and deeply inhumane in the particular bloodless way that corporate language manages to be. The man driving the initiative was Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb was 41 years old, and he had never, in his entire professional life, been told no by anyone who mattered. He had an MBA from Vanderbilt, a subscription to 3 different business podcasts, and a genuine, unironic belief that healthcare administration was fundamentally a logistics problem waiting to be optimized. He wore custom-fitted dress shirts in shades of slate and charcoal, and he spoke exclusively in the vocabulary of quarterly projections and strategic pivots. He had made his feelings about the older staff known across department head meetings, speaking about energy alignment and adaptive capacity, and bringing in people who could grow with the organization. Everyone understood perfectly well what he meant. When the restructured list came through, Ruth Calloway's name was on it alongside 7 others, all over 55, all at Hargrove for more than 8 years. Marcus signed the letters himself. He'd had Paige deliver them. Ruth's locker was in the basement-level support staff changing room, down the long corridor past the laundry facility where the industrial dryers ran continuously and the air always smelled like warm cotton and bleach. She walked the familiar route without looking at the walls. Inside the changing room, Consuela, a 45-year-old dietary aide who had worked beside Ruth for 9 years, crossed the room immediately, her hands reaching out to grip Ruth's forearm. "Dios mío, they cannot do this. You are the heart of this floor. You're going to do no such thing," Ruth said, gently but firmly. She patted Consuela's hand and unlatched her locker. "You have 2 kids in high school and a mortgage. You are going to keep your head down and do your job." "But it's not right," Consuela insisted. Ruth pulled her personal items from the locker, with the methodical calm of a woman packing for a short, expected trip. A photograph of a mountain range, a small tin of peppermint candies, a worn paperback novel, a tube of hand cream. She placed each item carefully into her canvas tote bag. Lots of things aren't right, Ruth said. Not unkindly, not bitterly. That's not new information. She pulled her hospital ID badge from around her neck. She looked at the small, terrible photo on its face. She looked, she thought, like somebody's grandmother who had wandered into a medical facility and been issued credentials by mistake. She set the badge in the bottom of her locker and closed the door. She picked up her tote bag. She walked out. The walk from the basement changing room to the main exit took Ruth past the emergency department. She had not intended to slow down. She had not intended to stop. But as she passed the glass-walled triage area, her feet simply quit cooperating with her plan. Inside the ER, barely visible through the frosted lower panels of the glass partition, a medical resident was standing over a small dark-haired boy on a gurney. The boy was sitting rigid and silent in a way that children of that age almost never sit. Perfectly still, perfectly upright, with the particular stillness of a body working very hard at the fundamental task of breathing. His lips carried the faintest shadow of blue. Not obvious. Just there, if you knew exactly what you were looking at. The resident was reaching for a nebulizer, running down the standard asthma script. The boy's fingernails were blue. Ruth turned and walked through the ER entrance. "Excuse me," she said to the triage desk, in the pleasant, neutral tone of someone who needed directions. "I need to speak to whoever is managing Bay 2. The triage nurse looked up with the particular expression reserved for non-urgent visitors. "Are you a family member?" "No," Ruth said. She was already moving past the desk. "His nails are blue. That child is not having an asthma attack. He's in a vascular ring. You have about 3 minutes to get a surgeon who knows what that means before his airway collapses from the outside." She pushed open the door to Bay 2. The resident looked up, startled. His name tag read Dr. Pellegrino. Ruth walked to the boy's bedside. She took in his posture, his color, the specific quality of his respiratory effort, the way his small chest was working in a compensatory pattern that a bronchodilator would do nothing to address. She looked at the mother. When did the breathing problems start? Since he was 2. They always say asthma. The inhalers don't. They don't help, Ruth said. Not a question. No, the mother said, and began to cry silently. Ruth looked at Pellegrino. This child has a double aortic arch, compressing his trachea and esophagus. The cyanosis is your severity indicator. You need a CT angiogram and cardiothoracic surgery paged right now, not after the nebulizer. Right now. Are you a physician? No, Ruth said. She picked up her tote bag. Then you need to leave this area. Page cardiothoracic, Ruth said quietly. She looked at the boy once more. His dark eyes found hers. He was frightened. She held his gaze and gave him a small, unhurried nod, the kind that meant, "I see you." Then she turned and walked out. 3 steps down the hallway, she heard Pellegrino's voice behind her on his pager. "I need a cardiothoracic consult in Bay 2. Pediatric patient, suspected vascular ring." Ruth kept walking. She didn't allow herself to look back. She had a bus to catch. Marcus Webb did not learn about the incident in Bay 2 until 2 days later, when the cardiothoracic surgeon, a meticulous and deeply unsentimental man named Dr. Howard Briggs, marched into his office and placed a formal incident report on his desk. "Someone tipped off Pellegrino," Briggs said, standing rather than sitting. "Whoever it was caught a double aortic arch that would have been missed for another 6 hours at minimum. We got the CTA, confirmed the diagnosis, and I operated this morning. The kid is fine, but I want to know who made that call, because they almost certainly saved his life." Marcus scanned the report. "It says here an unidentified woman in the ER corridor made the initial suggestion. That's what Pellegrino says. He described her as an older woman, white hair, scrubs, orthopedic shoes." Briggs paused. "Badgeless." Marcus looked up. 20 minutes later, Paige was confirming that yes, the description matched Ruth Calloway, who had been issued her termination that same morning. Marcus spent a moment organizing his thoughts in the particular way that men who do not like being made to feel grateful organize their thoughts, by identifying a way to reframe the situation as someone else's procedural failure. "She was on hospital property without authorization," Marcus said finally. After her termination was initiated, she entered a clinical area without credentials. That's a liability issue. Briggs looked at him with the flat, surgical expression he normally reserved for tissue that was beyond saving. A 4-year-old boy is breathing without assistance this morning, Briggs said, because of Ruth Calloway. And I'm grateful for that, Marcus said, in a tone that communicated precisely the opposite. But we can't have former employees wandering into patient care areas. He called legal to confirm the termination was properly documented. It was. Briggs picked up the incident report, tucked it under his arm, and walked out. Ruth spent the first week after her termination quietly and practically. She walked every morning. She applied for 3 jobs at other medical facilities and did not hear back in any meaningful way. She reorganized her kitchen cabinets. She finished the novel she had retrieved from her locker. She did not think about Mogadishu. She did not think about Fallujah. She did not think about the 18 months in the Korangal Valley in Afghanistan that had dismantled her and rebuilt her and left her permanently altered in ways she could never fully explain to anyone who had not also been dismantled and rebuilt. She had become very good at not thinking about these things. On the 8th day after her termination, she received a phone call from a number with a Virginia area code. She looked at it for 3 rings before answering. Ruth Calloway, she said. There was a half-second pause, the kind created by encrypted relay systems. Ruth, a man's voice, low, familiar, carrying the specific exhausted weight of a person who had not slept properly in a very long time. It's Reeves. Ruth sat down slowly on her kitchen chair. Thomas Reeves. She had not spoken to Thomas Reeves in 7 years. The last time she had seen him, he had been lying face down in the dust of a forward operating base in Kunar Province with 2 sucking chest wounds, and she had kept him breathing through sheer obstinacy and a chest seal she had fashioned from MRE packaging because she had used her last proper seal 12 minutes earlier on the man who had been shot first. Reeves, she said, I know I'm the last person you expected. You're not, she said. I expected you'd call eventually. How are you, Ruth? I was fired last week, she said, without particular drama, varying degrees. A pause with something in it that might have been a suppressed laugh. I heard, that's actually... He stopped. She heard him decide to be direct. We have a situation. One of my men is in Hargrove General right now. He's in bad shape. We have a civilian surgical team managing something they don't have the clearance to fully understand. I need someone in that room who knows the full context, whose hands I trust. Ruth looked out her kitchen window at the oak tree in her backyard, losing its leaves in the copper-gold cascade of a Tennessee October. Reeves, she said carefully, I was fired from that hospital. I surrendered my badge. I know. I am not a surgeon. I know that too. Then you know what you're asking isn't small. I know what I'm asking, Reeves said, and I know who I'm asking. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. The oak tree dropped a branch of leaves in a small, silent wave. Tell me about the injury, she said. She was back inside Hargrove General 45 minutes later. She had not called ahead. She had not gone through the main entrance. She walked, with the measured authority of someone who had every right to be exactly where she was, through the ambulance bay and down the service corridor. She knew this building. She had walked its corridors for 11 years. The badge she wore on a lanyard was not the Hargrove General ID she had left in her locker. It was older, considerably more federal in nature, laminated in heavier plastic with a color-coded border that meant specific things to people who knew how to read it. She had kept it in the false bottom of a shoebox on the top shelf of her bedroom closet for 11 years, telling herself each year that she would never need it again. The charge nurse on the 4th floor ICU was Patricia, a former Army medic who had transferred to Hargrove General 4 years ago. They had the particular mutual respect of 2 women who had both seen what human beings looked like when the situation became genuinely serious. Patricia looked up from her charting. She saw Ruth. She looked at the lanyard. Her expression changed in a way that was very small and very significant. Room 412, Patricia said quietly. Dr. Okafor is in there. He's been in there for 3 hours. Thank you, Ruth said. She walked to room 412 and pushed open the door. The room was quiet with the particular tension of a space that has recently contained a great deal of noise. Dr. Emmanuel Okafor stood at the foot of the bed with his arms crossed and the look of a man staring at a problem he cannot fully see. In the bed was a man Ruth would put at 35, though it was difficult to be certain. He was large, the frame of him visible even under the blankets and monitoring leads. His head was shaved. There was a tattoo on the left side of his neck that Ruth recognized as belonging to a unit whose official designation she would not speak aloud in any room she didn't control. His name, according to the chart on the door, was listed as John Doe. His blood pressure was reading 82/50 and dropping. Okafor looked up. He saw a 61-year-old woman in civilian clothes who had walked in without a knock. "Who are you?" he asked. "Ruth Calloway. I'm here at the request of the patient's unit commander. I have clearance documentation." She glanced at him. "But I'd rather talk about why his pressure is dropping." Okafor studied her for 3 seconds and made the decision that spoke well of him as a physician. He chose the patient over the protocol. He came in with a penetrating abdominal wound partially addressed in the field, Okafor said, moving beside her. "The field intervention was competent, but he's been hypotensive since admission and I can't stabilize him. 4 units of packed red cells and 2 of FFP. He's not responding." "What's in the field notes?" Ruth asked. "Classified. I received a sealed packet I don't have clearance to open." "I do," she said. "May I?" Okafor gestured. Ruth picked up the sealed folder, pressed her lanyard badge against the seam, and the seal dissolved. She read the single page twice. "Dr. Okafor," she said quietly. "He was exposed to a classified compound in the field. One of the side effects at the relevant dosage is suppression of normal clotting cascade proteins. He's not failing to respond to the blood because he's lost too much. His body cannot clot." "What compound?" "I can't tell you without elevating your clearance level, which takes longer than we have. But I know the antidote protocol. It's not in any civilian formulary. If you have 2 specific medications in your pharmacy and you call them in right now, I can tell you exactly what to do." The monitor's alarmed. Blood pressure dropped another 8 points. Okafor looked at his patient. He looked at Ruth. He pulled out his phone. Ruth worked beside Okafor with the compressed, wordless efficiency of someone who has spent a significant portion of their life doing precisely this, just under considerably worse physical conditions. She directed the treatment protocol with an authority so clean and certain that Okafor, who had been running ICUs for 15 years, found himself deferring without friction. The first medication arrived from the pharmacy 17 minutes after his call. Ruth drew it herself, checked the dosage, and administered it. The second arrived 6 minutes later. They waited. At the 22-minute mark, the blood pressure began to climb. Not dramatically, not in the sudden cinematic spike of television medicine. It came up the way a tide comes in, steadily, incrementally. 82/50 became 89/56, became 97/62. The patient's eyes opened, a narrow crack of consciousness, groggy and unfocused, but the eyes of a man who was still inside his own body. Ruth sat down in the chair beside the bed, which she had not done since she entered the room, and she breathed. "Who are you?" Dr. Okafor said quietly, from the foot of the bed. "A retired Army combat surgical specialist," she said, "most recently employed as a cafeteria nurse at this facility, until last week." Okafor said nothing for a moment. "They fired you?" "Restructuring." Okafor looked at the stabilizing numbers on the monitor. "That," he said with complete clinical conviction, "is the single most idiotic institutional decision I have encountered in 20 years of medicine." Ruth smiled, very slightly. They didn't have all the information. The call that Marcus Webb received at 6:47 the following morning came from a number he did not recognize. "Mr. Webb." The voice was a woman's, flat and professional, and entirely devoid of preamble. "My name is Colonel Sandra Yates. I'm calling from the Joint Special Operations Command Liaison Office in Virginia. I need to speak with you about an unauthorized access incident at your facility last night." Marcus had already heard a partial account from the night supervisor. A woman had entered the ICU without credentials. He had asked legal to start a review. "Yes," Marcus said carefully. "I'm aware there was an incident. We're investigating the breach of security protocol, and we intend to—" "Mr. Webb." Yates's voice did not change in volume or tone, but something in it shifted in a way that made the back of Marcus's neck prickle. "The woman who entered your facility last night holds a clearance level that exceeds anything held by anyone currently employed at Hargrove General, including yourself. The patient she treated is a classified operative whose survival is a matter of active national security interest." The treatment she administered was drawn from a classified medical protocol that no civilian physician has access to. Marcus was very still. The man in room 452 is alive this morning because of Ruth Calloway, Yates continued. If she had not intervened, your attending intensivist, an excellent physician by all accounts, would have continued an ineffective protocol until the patient died, because he lacked the information necessary to understand what was actually wrong. I see, Marcus said. You fired her, Yates said, last week. There was a restructuring initiative. Mr. Webb, not louder, just more final. I'm going to send you a summary document. You'll receive it within the hour. After you read it, you'll understand more clearly who you let go. A pause. I want to be direct with you. A number of people with a great deal of operational significance are going to want to express their gratitude to Ruth Calloway in person. They'll arrive at your facility today. I suggest you make it easy for them to find her. The call ended. The document arrived 40 minutes later. Marcus read it alone in his office with the door closed. Ruth Calloway, born 1963, Knoxville, Tennessee. Army enlistment 1982. A deployment history extending from 1993 through 2013. Mogadishu, Fallujah. The Korangal Valley, 2009 through 2011, during which an incident in Kunar Province was described across 4 paragraphs with multiple redactions, culminating in a notation that read, Operative Calloway maintained medical function under sustained direct fire for a period of 11 hours without relief, resulting in the survival of 16 personnel who would otherwise have been categorized as non-survivable. 16 personnel, 11 hours, under direct fire. A silver star, a second decoration classified at a level Marcus could not access. At the top of the document, under the operational designator field, was a single word, Valkyrie. He looked at the personnel photograph clipped to the front page, a younger version of the woman he knew as the cafeteria nurse, with mismatched scrub tops and reading glasses on a beaded chain. In the photograph, she was in field gear, squinting against a pitiless sun. She looked exactly the same, he realized. The age and the white hair were different, but the expression, the quality of absolute stillness behind the eyes, was identical. The expression described in the nursing supervisor's incident report from 2 days ago. A woman who was not alarmed by urgency and not moved by pressure, and not, at any level, performing calm. Simply calm. He put the document face down on his desk and needed a moment to rearrange the furniture of the last 11 years. The convoy arrived at Hargrove General at 2:15 in the afternoon. Ruth was not in the building. No one in the confused bureaucratic aftermath of the previous night had thought to call her. She was at home, in her kitchen, when her phone rang again. Yates, she said. Ms. Calloway, I'm going to need you to come back to Hargrove General. Ruth set down what she was doing. Is the patient? He's stable. He's asking for you, actually. But that's not the primary reason. A pause with something in it. Not quite amusement. Something adjacent. There are some people here who want to see you. I think you probably know who they are. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Give me 20 minutes, she said. She wore dark slacks and a blue sweater and her orthopedic shoes. She drove herself. She walked through the main entrance for the first time in over a week. The lobby of Hargrove General was a wide, neutral space, cream walls and vinyl flooring, and today it was very different from its usual institutional quiet. A stillness had settled over it that had nothing to do with calm. The visitors who were normally scattered across the seating area had unconsciously consolidated toward the perimeter. The reception staff were attempting to look professionally neutral and not entirely succeeding. Marcus Webb was standing beside Dr. Okafor and Dr. Briggs near the elevators, his expression carrying the look of a man who has recently learned something that required him to re-examine a significant number of prior assumptions and who had not yet fully completed that process. And then she saw the others. 6 of them, in civilian clothes, standing in a loose formation near the center of the lobby. 3 were using canes or crutches. 1 was in a wheelchair. All of them were looking at her. She knew every face, not all of them clearly, because she had treated some in conditions that made faces difficult to retain with precision, in the dark and the dust and the noise. But she knew the bearing. She knew what it meant to be looked at by a person who understood, at a cellular level, exactly what it had cost to keep them alive. At the front of the group stood Thomas Reeves, gray at the temples now, holding a small wooden box in both hands. Ruth stopped walking. The lobby was very quiet. Reeves came to her. He stopped 3 feet away. Up close, she could see the scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw, the one she had closed herself with a field kit in the back of a helicopter over a valley in Afghanistan. His eyes were the same, dark and careful, and carrying the quality of someone who had spent a long time looking at things they had to keep looking at anyway. "Valkyrie," he said. "Don't," Ruth said, quietly and without heat. "I have to," he said. He held out the box. "She made me promise." Before she retired. Ruth looked at the box. She did not reach for it immediately. "Who made you?" "General Whitmore." He said it simply. "She said you'd know what it was for." Slowly, Ruth took the box. She opened it. Inside, on a bed of dark velvet, was a folded citation and a medal. Not a new one. Old, the ribbon slightly faded, and the surface carrying the fine marks of age. She picked up the citation and unfolded it. She read it. Her throat tightened. "This was already awarded," she said. 11 years ago. I wasn't there to receive it." "You had already left," Reeves said. "You were very thorough about disappearing." "I had reasons," she said. "I know," he said. "Whitmore knows. Nobody held it against you." He nodded toward the box. "She wanted you to have it properly. That's all." Ruth looked at the medal for a long moment. She looked at the lobby around her, the administrators trying to maintain professional composure, the young nurses who had quietly gathered at the corridor entrances to watch something they did not yet fully understand, Dr. Okafor standing with his arms at his sides, and an expression of profound, careful attention. She looked at Marcus Webb, who was looking at her with the expression of a man who has realized he has made a mistake too large to simply administer his way out of, and who is still in the process of determining what to do with that realization. "I'm going to need to say something," Reeves said quietly, "that is going to happen whether you want it to or not, because they drove from 4 different states to be here, and they deserve to be able to say it." Ruth closed the box. She held it in both hands. She said nothing. Reeves turned. He looked at the 6 men. He nodded once. It was not a formal command. There was no bark of attention, no stamp of feet. It happened the way things happen between people who have been trained to the same absolute standard and who share a language deeper than words. They simply, together, in one unhurried and completely unified motion, came to attention. And then they saluted her. 6 men, standing in a civilian hospital lobby in various states of physical repair, in civilian clothes, with civilian haircuts and civilian shoes, rendering the salute that does not belong to rank or ceremony, but to something older and more fundamental than either, the recognition, by people who understand the cost, of what was given. Ruth felt the tears before she decided to allow them, which was always the way it happened with her. A sudden heat behind the eyes, and then the fact of them on her face, which she did not reach up to address because her hands were holding the box. She drew herself up. She was 61 years old, and she weighed 173 pounds, and she was wearing orthopedic shoes, and her reading glasses were on the beaded chain around her neck. She was not impressive to look at in any way that the exterior catalog of a person can convey. She raised her right hand. She returned the salute. The lobby of Hargrove General Hospital was very quiet for a very long moment. Marcus Webb, who had built a career on the ability to walk into any room and immediately establish the terms of the engagement, found himself entirely unable to speak. He looked at the woman he had fired for being redundant, standing in the center of his lobby with tears running down her face and 6 special operations veterans saluting her. And he understood, with a clarity that his MBA and his consulting firm and his entire professional framework had never once produced, that he had made a mistake that no amount of restructuring language could minimize. Dr. Okafor walked forward and stood beside Ruth without saying anything, which was the right decision, and he knew it. Dr. Briggs stepped forward. He was not a sentimental man, but he had spent the last 2 days thinking about a 4-year-old boy breathing without assistance on the 2nd floor, and everything that had to be true about a person to catch that diagnosis in the seconds it took to walk past a glass partition. "Miss Calloway," Briggs said. Ruth lowered her hand. She looked at him. "I would like to discuss the possibility of a position in this hospital that more accurately reflects your qualifications, if you're interested." Ruth considered him for a moment. She thought about the bus ride home 11 days ago, the late afternoon light through the dirty windows, the folded termination letter in her scrub pocket. She thought about the cafeteria and the bleach rag and Consuela's hand on her arm. She thought about a child with blue fingernails. She thought about the man in room 412, whose eyes had opened. That depends, she said, on whether the position involves emptying the coffee urns. Briggs blinked. Then something moved through his expression that was as close to a smile as his face was built to produce. It does not. Then we can talk, Ruth said. She turned to Marcus Webb. He was standing very still. Mr. Webb, she said. Ms. Calloway. His voice was quiet. I owe you an apology. You owe me nothing, Ruth said. Not coldly. You made a business decision with the information you had. You didn't have very much of it. She paused. That's not unusual. Most people don't. She held the wooden box a little tighter. She looked around the lobby one more time. I'd like to go see my patient, she said. Reeves stepped aside. The 6 men parted. Ruth Calloway walked toward the elevators, carrying the box, her orthopedic shoes making their familiar unhurried sound on the polished floor. The lobby stayed quiet for a long moment after she passed. Then, slowly, the ordinary sounds of a hospital resumed around the extraordinary thing that had just happened inside it. Later that night, after the men had said what needed to be said in room 412, and after Okafor had conducted his evening assessment and declared the vital signs encouraging enough to allow cautious optimism, Ruth sat alone in the family waiting area on the 4th floor. She had the wooden box on her knee. She had not opened it again since the lobby. The hospital at night had its own particular register. Quieter, slower, the overhead lights dimmed in the corridors, the monitors audible from behind the closed doors of the patient rooms, a steady rhythm that was at once clinical and, if you had spent enough time with it, almost companionable. She thought about Consuela, who had texted her 3 times in the past week asking how she was doing. She thought about the boy in room 412, who had said, when she walked in, I heard you were the one, and she had said, you heard wrong, the doctor did most of it, which was not entirely accurate, but was the version she preferred. She thought about 11 years of very small, very consistent, very unspectacular acts of care. The dietary trays, the medication reminders, the specific way she had learned to sit with patients who were frightened and in pain in the particular dark of 3 in the morning, not performing comfort, but simply providing it. She opened the box. She looked at the medal. A silver star, awarded for actions in a classified location on a classified date. The citation language was formal and compressed, and entirely inadequate to the 11 hours it was attempting to describe, but that was the nature of official language, and she had made her peace with it a long time ago. She closed the box. For the first time in a very long time, she did not feel quite so urgently like someone who needed to remain invisible. The elevator opened. Dr. Okafor stepped out, still in his white coat. He walked over. Go home, he said. The patient is stable. You've done enough for today. Have you eaten anything since this morning? He paused. That's not. The cafeteria is still open. Consuela makes a decent soup on Thursdays. She stood, the wooden box in her hands. Come on. I'll show you where they keep the good bread rolls. They're not on the official menu, but they exist if you know who to ask. Okafor recalibrated. All right, he said. They walked together toward the elevator, the quiet hospital moving around them, its monitors keeping their steady count, its corridors carrying the accumulated weight of every ordinary, extraordinary thing that happens inside the walls of a place that receives people at their most broken, and does its best to send them home whole. Ruth pressed the button for the ground floor. The elevator doors closed. If this story of quiet courage and late justice stayed with you, hit that like button. The people who carry the most walk the quietest. Share this video with someone who needs that reminder today. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about the unsung, the unseen, and the unstoppable. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were Marcus Webb and you finally read that file?